Well, good afternoon, good part of the day, good evening, depending where you are. I have the pleasure today of having Roman Pichler with me, one of the well-known names in the Agile space. He's based out of London. He was kind enough to join me today to have a candid, unscripted conversation about the topic that we will be presenting just in a few seconds. I am Jim Gendel. I'm based out of New York City and New York, the United States. I will not be spending too much time presenting myself beyond what I just said. I really want to give the opportunity for Roman to share his thoughts on the subject. So first, Roman, if you don't mind, and I'll be sharing something produced by you just temporarily, could you please give us a few nuggets about yourself, your line of work, and etc.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, nice to be with you, Gene. Nice chatting to you. Nice talking to you. So the work that I do is really focused on product people, people working in product management, product owners, product managers. And I've been involved with Agile development and product management now for about 20 years. And yeah, so I tend to, I teach product owners, product managers, to a certain extent coach and consult individuals, help organizations establish effective product management practices, and advise the people who lead product management groups and teams. And I'm pretty much specialized in Agile practices. And that's about it.
That's very short and to the point, but I think people that know you and your name, they can associate you with your great work out there. Some of the books I've actually read, some of them, product ownership with Scrum, I believe. You know, it was a pretty interesting years back. So today, what brings us together is well, my invitation and your generous willingness to attend and discuss. Recently, you wrote, to be specific, in May, you published this article, interesting article, 5 product owner myths busted. And am I sharing my screen? Can you see?
I can, yes, thank you.
So just temporarily, people know where it's coming from. The URL will be shared with this video when we release it. So what really resonated with me are some of the myths you're trying to bust. And I will go directly to the first one that is really interesting to me. It really resonates with me. The way it is framed is the product owner is a tactical role focused on managing the product backlog. Now, there's a write-up in this paragraph. There's a description of something that we probably are familiar with. The word scaling, of course, is in there. And we see many companies are very keen on scaling, getting, making things bigger, making things more, they try to upscale. And it seems to be that the very well known, and I think it's, almost commercially very successful framework that's out, it's called SAFe. And you're alluding to it. So I'm going to pause framing this. Could you please tell me a little more about some of the things that went into writing this, busting this myth, or unpacking this, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so it's a very common misunderstanding that I've encountered really for many years, that the product owner is largely focused on the execution, the delivery, the tactical aspects, you could say, of the work, or it's a tactical product management role. And I think there's some reasons why this idea is pretty strong and fairly widespread. And I think one reason is that Scrum, the way I look at it, is a development framework. It wants to facilitate the development of complex products and help a group of people, help a team do that. And so it doesn't really talk about things like product discovery. It doesn't really talk about things like interviewing users or observing users. It doesn't talk about things like creating and validating a product strategy or deriving a product roadmap. It doesn't talk about looking into how a product is monetized and the business model and maybe creating a financial forecast. It very much is focused on what are the core essential practices that are necessary to help a group of people organize their work. And so all it offers is the product backlog. And the product backlog, I think, is a tactical tool. It allows people and allows teams to capture product decisions, detailed product decisions. And I think because of that more tactical nature of Scrum as a development framework and the tactical nature of the product backlog, a lot of people draw the conclusion, therefore, the person who prioritizes the product backlog or is ultimately responsible that a product backlog exists and that it is prioritized, that must be a tactical role as well. I think that's one of the misunderstandings, or one of the causes for the misunderstanding, I should say, despite the fact that, you know, Scrum's been stating, I guess, for as long as I can remember, that the product owner is responsible for ensuring that the product creates appropriate value, or even to maximize the value of that product. And then the second reason is, you know, something I've touched upon here in this article, and as part of that myth, is the SAFe framework. And SAFe uses what I see as a common and popular way to scale up and avoid that a single product person, a single product owner is overworked. And the way SAFe does it, and you can see it here in the screen share, is that SAFe splits the product owner responsibilities. And whereas I'd say that a product owner in a Scrum context, a Scrum product owner has full stack ownership, so owns the discovery as well as the and the strategic product decisions, as well as the tactical ones and the execution. What Scrum does is, in order to facilitate scaling, is that split across two roles: a SAFe product manager and a SAFe product owner. And again, you know, having a strategic, the SAFe product manager role, and a tactical role, the SAFe product owner, common scaling approach. And sometimes that's a helpful scaling approach, and sometimes it isn't. But I think what it has done, it has increased the confusion, you know, what the product owner role really is all about. And so people who are familiar with the SAFe framework, when they hear the term product owner, they immediately think of that tactical role that is primarily responsible for managing a product backlog or parts of a product backlog and interacting with development teams, but would not be responsible, that is the SAFe product owner, for strategic decisions and product discovery and talking to users and customers and all those good things that I think should be part of the work of a Scrum product owner. So yeah, so those are my thoughts about that sort of misunderstanding, that myth.
No, that's very insightful. So a couple of questions, just, you know, the begging to be asked. So given that we often see this being delegated, you know, misunderstood and delegated to, well, the technical product owner, someone who is not focused on strategy, mission, vision, has nothing to do with budgeting and finance. This is just a tactical, almost like a jockey. In my experience, and tell me if your observations are different, we end up seeing BAs, XPMs, tech leads step in this role to play it because a real business person, you know, really has no interest, has no appetite into being at that tactical level, trying to you know, move Jira tickets or you know, work with component items, because essentially those teams most likely are not even feature teams, they're component teams. What are your thoughts on that? What's your observation?
Yeah, so you sort of touch upon an interesting aspect there, which I guess is another cause for some of the misunderstandings that that surround the product owner role, and that is that quite a few product owners who I've met over the years weren't product owners in the literal sense. I mean, product owner means the person who owns a product on behalf of the company. And for me, again, that is full stack ownership. That means owns all the relevant aspects of the product and is empowered to make those decisions. particularly if no consensus within the Scrum team and the key stakeholders can be achieved, and somebody who is then responsible that the product creates the desired value. And so not everybody who's called a product owner has that responsibility and has that authority. I've met quite a few people who were called product owner, but actually looked after a product part. And in some cases, that's a component, like an architecture, in a sense of an architecture building block. So it might be, say, a service or a group of microservices, or it might be a layer, or it might be a subsystem. And in some cases, those individuals looked after a feature, one or more features, in the sense of an end user facing capability. So, the ability, for instance, here on LinkedIn to connect with other people and build your network. That might be an end user facing capability, a feature. While again using product people who are more specialized and take responsibility and take good care of parts of a product, like somebody who essentially owns a feature, that can be very useful in order to scale up and facilitate I can't even say the word now. It must be not very important. Collaboratively managing a product. I think then calling somebody who owns a feature, somebody who manages a component, a product owner, is not really helpful, because it just creates a lot of confusion. And so I don't want to go on too much about this, but it reminds me of an experience I had a few years back when I was running a product owner workshop at a geodata company here in the UK. And I was expecting, based on the telephone conversations and the email exchanges that took place, and me familiarizing myself with the product portfolio of the company, I was expecting about between 5 and 10 people in the room, and I turn up and they're about 25. So one of the first things I say is like, "Hi everyone, and nice to see you all, and nice to see that so much interest in this workshop, but this is a workshop for the product owners." And so nobody moves. People just nod. It's like, "Yeah, we know it." And so I'm a little bit confused, and I say like, but surely guys, you're not all product owners." And the attendees are like, "Oh yes, we are. Oh, yeah." And so that was a case where most of the people in the room were what I would refer to as component owners, so owned architecture building blocks, but not really a product in the sense that it's an asset that creates value for a group of people, users, and possibly customers, and at the same time for the business, largely on its own. And so I think it's important to be clear on what a product is. It's important to be clear on what it means to own a product, and not to confuse component ownership or feature ownership or ownership of part of a product with the overall product ownership. Because again, otherwise, I think it's going to be extremely difficult to successfully apply the product owner role. You just end up with very different product owners who require very different levels of authority, and also require very different skills. And so coming back, Gene, to what you said, I know that was a long answer. You can tell I like to teach and talk.
I love it. Yeah. No, it's a great answer. It's a very expanded answer. I appreciate you giving some additional nuggets. Or were you saying something else? Because I had another small follow-up to that.
Oh, no, please go ahead.
So I was interested to hearing your view on something else. So on the right-hand side of your diagram that we're sharing now on the screen, I call it a layered cake, right? So we have too many owners and managers and people that are aligned with, so they're layered. So what sometimes hits me on my, what hits me is there any relationship between why organizations would be doing this? And I guess maybe I'm coming from the angle do you see there is any consistency between the layered structure that is recommended by SAFe in the traditional organizational design as we typically see it with large organizations? And if I were to take this even further, and this becomes now a chicken and egg question, what was born first? What was born first, the chicken or the egg? You look at any complex project management tool that has the word Agile in it. It's got so many different layers at portfolio level, you name it level. And so I see a lot of consistency between what you see here in the diagram. Of course, the original SAFe diagram is well known, it's out there. traditional organizational design and a tooling structure. Do you have any thoughts on that, or am I the only one that sees this consistency?
Yeah, I think, probably what you're saying is probably true. The option on the right here, having a more strategic product role and a more tactical product role, and splitting product ownership that way is probably easier to implement for many organizations. And interesting enough, way back when I first started teaching public product owner workshops, I did every now and then meet an attendee who would explain to me that that's not how they would work, like, how the product owner role is intended in Scrum, but they would have a technical or product manager, and then a customer facing product manager. So, that is pretty much the split that you see here. And it's pretty close to the SAFe split. So it's something that's been around for many, many years. And I would say that it is, so my take on this is it's a valid scaling option. It's something that is an option that is available, and can be helpful in a certain context. But putting a strong product management focus on this, or having a strong product management bias, I'd say it tends to be helpful and advisable when a product is stable. So either the product has stabilized, and that's typically the case when a product enters the maturity product lifecycle stage, which might take years for the product to reach, or when the product goes through a phase of stability. And that might be when the product is growing, but it's growing very steadily. But often then that phase of stability doesn't last very long, and that's the drawback. And so when you have a lot of stability and limited uncertainty, a limited amount of change and innovation, then having that split can be successful. And the reason for that is that when innovation, change, and risk are low, then you typically have a stable strategy. And a stable strategy for me is in a way the prerequisite that this work split is successful, because if your strategy is volatile, then you need to have a very close alignment between the tactical product decisions and the strategic product decisions. So somebody who takes care of the strategy, like the SAFe product manager, and somebody who takes care of the tactics, like the SAFe product owner, have to work super closely together. And that might work out if the individuals know each other and they've successfully worked together before. But I've certainly experienced that in organizations where it didn't work out, and essentially strategic and tactical decisions didn't align, and strategic decisions didn't guide the tactical decisions, and insights from the tactical work, from say getting feedback on product increments, didn't inform then the strategic decisions. And that's a shame, because clearly those two things need to work together. The circles here that you see, or the ellipses, and by the way, what I use here, I think, is a simplified version of Mike Cohen's planning onion. That's at least where I got the idea originally from. I've drawn them distinct, but in reality, they're very, very closely connected. And so, yeah, whenever there's a lot of change and uncertainty, purely from a product perspective, I wouldn't advise necessarily working with a strategic and a tactical role.
Thank you. Thank you for this. This is pretty informative. Roman, if you don't mind, I will. I wanted to cover 3 myths, and I will come back to the next one over, which is about product ownership, product owner being responsible for team performance. This is very interesting to unpack, but I would like to skip it just for a second and go to myth number 4, where you talk about product owner being responsible for writing user stories. The reason why I wanted to skip over and go to the number 4 is because it seems to me that misunderstanding of the role of a PO that you describe in number 2, a PO being a tactical role, mostly focused on managing tactical things, could be also very consistent with the myth that because of that, they should be drafted into all of these, let's call them administrative activities. Mm-hmm. So do you mind giving some thoughts on that? So what
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think it's an interesting topic, because I think that there's sort of a balance to create between not spending most of your time as the product owner on the product backlog work and detailing beautiful user stories, and at the same time not making the mistake of not attending to the product backlog and not being involved in any form of product backlog refinement and management at all. But yeah, I mean, it'd be a mistake to see the product owner as a user story writer. It doesn't say anywhere in Scrum that the product owner shall write user stories. In fact, user stories aren't a formal part of the Scrum framework. They originated in extreme programming. And I mean, I personally think user stories can be very useful for end user facing products, but generally speaking, the idea has been in Scrum for a long time that product backlog work should be collaborative. It should be a collaborative effort that is shared between the product owner and the development team. So, part of that, one of the causes of this misunderstanding is not seeing the product owner role for what it is intended, as a person who manages, who owns the product and is responsible for maximizing the value, and the misunderstanding that the product owner has a tactical role. But the other cause is thinking our development team is only responsible for developing, and that must mean programming software. Whereas an agile development team, first of all, is a cross-functional development team. So for an end-user facing product, there should be UX, UI designers on the team. There should be testers on the team, not only people who have programming and architecture knowledge. And secondly, as I've already mentioned, an agile development team should play an active role in shaping the product backlog and participate in making detailed product decisions, in discovering product backlog items, in discovering detailed functionality, describing the detailed functionality, and then breaking down larger pieces of functionality in the product backlog into more detailed ones. And I think it's equally valuable for members of the development team to hear feedback directly from the users, or to look at data when you release software to be it selected users or the entire target group, and help with the data analysis and help drawing the right conclusions. I think that informs the right decisions in order to shape the solution and progress the product. And it leverages people's creativity and knowledge, and typically means that people are more motivated. People have a better understanding and are more motivated to take good care of the solution, own the product details, and do a great job in advancing the product.
Well, thank you for that. Certainly very interesting perspective, and I, to a larger degree, very much agree with it. Just curious to know if you have any additional thoughts around. Well, let me just frame this a little bit. So if we have an organization that is pretty mythical about the role of a PO, doesn't really have it well defined, and it's got misunderstanding about what Scrum is, let alone some of its more scaled up versions, because we can certainly talk about that, maybe not today. Do you suspect having any risks of drafting? I don't want to call them, well, we'll call them for what they are, right? So not good candidates to be a PO, almost like leftover roles, people that, he or she is not a developer, but we have them already on staff. What's the best way to make use of their time? Oh, well, in Scrum, there is a role of PO. Why just plug them in there? And what we see next is these are not so well suitable folks are being thrown into this very critical role. And as a result of that, they obviously get drafted into these very tactical, very administrative activities, certainly dilute the meaning and the criticality of the role of a PO. So any thoughts on that, or maybe too much of a stretch?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much believe in magic, that you take this amazing, hip, cool, I don't know if Scrum is hip and cool anymore, but I mean, you know, it still seems there's a lot of interest in Agile and Scrum. So you take this framework, this Agile framework, and then it doesn't really matter what background and qualification people have and what their current skill set is. You can just plug them into any role, you know, just kind of throw them in there and they'll perform amazingly well. I mean, of course, that's not the case. That's not the case in Scrum. That's not the case in any framework. I think in order to achieve success on a sustained basis, it's important to find the right people. And I just like yourself, I view the product owner role as a key role. And so it's worthwhile, being clear on what is this role all about, what is the core authority of the role, and what are the main responsibilities, what are typical tasks a product owner does. And then thinking about what is the specific product that we're talking about. Is it an end user facing product? Is it a revenue generating product? Is it a product that supports a revenue generating product or a service? Or is it an internal technical product? Because depending on the nature of the product, the individual will have different skills. If it's an internal supporting product, I'd be looking for somebody who's got strong technical skills. So I was working with Electronic Arts a few years back, and I was doing some work with the group that developed one of the bigger physics engines that are used in the larger computer games. And the product owner for that physics engine at the time was somebody who had a strong technical background and used to be a developer, quite rightly so, because a physics engine does all the clever animation in computer games. You know, is a technical product. It's essentially a supporting product that is integrated into the end user facing games, the actual games. You know, similar example would be an internal platform that provides shared services for various products. So, you know, basically things like to be able to, it could be the ability to persist data, for instance, or retrieve data and communicate with various data stores, data repositories, whatever they might be. And so again, such a product owner would need technical skills, where somebody who takes care of an end user facing commercial revenue generating product would know about the market, would have to know about the business model, would have to know about the trends in that market and the competition. So, you know, these are quite different skills profiles that you'd have. So, you know, again, first step is be clear on what is the Scrum product owner role all about. Secondly, you know, think about what kind of product is it, and in order then to succeed in managing that product, looking after that product, progressing that product, what are critical skills that the person would have to have. Then look for the right candidate, but still support the individual, particularly if the individual, if it's the first product owner and especially the first product management job of the individual. I mean, it takes people, in my experience, not hours or days or not even weeks to successfully you know, learn to be a product owner, but it's more a matter of months and years. I find it a fascinating job, but it's a demanding job. There's lots to it. So it just takes time to acquire the skills and to deepen them.
This is great. Thank you so much. And I would just suspect, your myth, number 4 myth, would be just amplified, to the magnitude of, if, let's say, if we were in the environment where a product was widely defined and more than one team was working on it, because then obviously the backlog would be just naturally bigger. There will be more backlog items, aka stories. And how would it be even humanly possible for a real PO, who should be a strategist and a visionary and a strategic, business person, to be doing all of this administrative story writing? Of course, it's difficult as is for one team doing Scrum. Imagine we had, 3, 4, 5 more teams. It would be just impossible. And therefore, it strongly resonates with me that delegating the story writing to a strategic persona is just a way of, I guess, diluting the importance of that persona, and kind of doesn't jive well with Scrum. Thank you for that. So my last question to you would be around, so the third myth, and let me scroll back up in your write-up. So I guess when it comes to performance, it's a very long and very, very independent conversation that we could probably have for a long, long time, right? Individual performance versus team performance. Do we measure performance? Why do we do it? A long conversation, but nevertheless, of course, since in Scrum the whole team works together and they, fly together, they crash and burn together, they deliver together, they perform together. Maybe we should be looking at the entire performance of the entire team, but of course we have to do that at the right angle. But nevertheless, is this really the PO's responsibility to measure performance?
No, I mean, I'd say, of course, it isn't. Again,
of course, sort of, because that's your myth.
Of course. Oh, no. How can you think that? I think, again, one of the reasons why it's a fairly common misunderstanding, at least in my experience, is that the product owner is seen as a tactical role and a delivery role, and somebody who's in a way closer to a project manager than a product manager. But as I've argued many times over the years, for me, the Scrum product owner is an Agile product manager. It's like a product manager in an Agile context, in an Agile setting, using Agile practices, at least to a certain extent, and working with Agile teams. You could say being part of an Agile team, if we take the Scrum team. But I do think that product owners play an important part in creating the environment for an Agile development team to succeed. And that is ensuring that people understand what the product is all about, who the customers and users are, what the specific value is that the product should create for the customers and users, what the specific business benefits are that the product should generate, and maybe what makes the product stand out. And then that there is at least a specific product goal that everybody works towards. And I personally like the fact that the current version of the Scrum Guide suggests the use of a product goal. And I like to think of it as a specific measurable outcome for the next, 2 to 6 months. So that might be, for instance, if I wanted to develop a healthy eating product to help people become more aware of their eating habits, maybe more specifically what they eat and how much people eat for breakfast, and sort of, if people eat the right amount of food, not too much, not too little, the right amount of calories, and also the right nutrients, I should say, nutrients, carbs and protein and so forth. And then the business part of that product goal could be to generate an initial user base and acquire initial users. And so that then provides guidance. And I think it's important for a development team to have that in order to be able to succeed and make the right decisions. But of course, the development team would agree to a sprint goal, or a sprint goal in Scrum, is only valid, the way I look at it, if the development team, collectively says, yep, that's understood and it's meaningful and it's realistic and we can work towards that goal. And then for me, the development team does a good job when the group regularly manages to meet the sprint goal. But that's then up to the development team ultimately, and its members, being a self-managing or self-organizing team. And then I'd say the Scrum Master is there to help with any self-management, self-organization issues, and help the team become more effective at identifying the right amount of work and pulling the right amount of work into the sprint, and at leveraging the right practices within the sprint, and at collaborating, at working together. That shouldn't be really the worry of the product owner, and that shouldn't really be the job of the product owner. But I mean, there's one more thing I'd like to say. I mean, sometimes that's also driven by the lack of a Scrum Master, the lack of a qualified and Scrum Master who's sufficiently available, that then kind of product owners get dragged into helping the team sort out issues. It's kind of natural, right? You work with a development team, you're responsible for the product success. The team is struggling, what you do, you try and help. And I think that's great. I mean, it's brilliant when product owners want to help, but if that becomes a permanent solution, then a product owner then kind of takes on part of the Scrum Master responsibilities, then that's not desirable, because as I write in the article, either it's going to make the work of the product owner unsustainable and then create some health issues, or the product owner is going to start neglecting some of the core responsibilities. And typically they are then around product discovery and product strategy. Those are important pieces of work that aren't super urgent, so you deprioritize them. But you then build up some discovery and strategy debts, basically, by not attending to those tasks, to those activities enough. And you take the chance, you take the risk that competitors surprise you, and you find yourself with the back against the wall.
Well, thank you for that, Roman. That's very informative, and that's certainly appreciated. I want to be mindful of your time. I have one summing up question, and I'm just gonna be, let me just do something real quick. I'm gonna do Control F on your article, and see, you have quite a few references to SAFe. So if I may, in a very unbiased way, of course, may I ask you, what's your overall perception of this framework? How does it relate? Is it relevant? How does it relate? Is it relevant? Consistency with Scrum, as you and I would know it. And of course, it's got the word Agile in it. Of course, it's Scale Agile framework. Also, it has mention of Scrum. It has mention of the roles. What are your general thoughts on this? Not obviously, if we discuss the entire framework with all of the little pieces and nuggets of it, it will probably take much longer than what we have budgeted for. But just in general.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, a difficult one for me to ask. So for a number of reasons, first of all, I'd like to avoid bashing models and frameworks.
Yes.
And I think ultimately there's good stuff in SAFe. There are also elements in SAFe that I find not always helpful and appropriate. But then the other reason is that I don't really look at myself as a SAFe expert, so I don't really want to, critique something that I may not understand in enough depth to be able to do so and have a balanced and fair judgment. So the elements of SAFe that I've particularly looked at have to do with ultimately the product owner role and the way product management is addressed and product management concerns are addressed by the model. And I'd say my perspective is that for certain products and in a certain context, some of the ideas in SAFe can work quite well, but for other products and for different contexts, they're not going to work particularly well. And so one of the biggest kind of bugbears or issues I have with SAFe is that the idea of splitting product ownership or product management responsibilities into a tactical and strategic role, strategic and tactical role, is the default. And I think it's just one of the options that we have, and making it as the default, I don't think is necessarily right, because it's not always the best option. It's not always the most applicable, the most helpful option. So, if I could kind of wish for changes, if there was a, if I had a magic wand, what I would wish for is that SAFe would certainly be more flexible in that space, and that SAFe would change the name of the SAFe product owner to something else, because it's not a product owner in the Scrum sense. It's a purely tactical role, and yeah, it has created quite a bit of confusion, I think.
I appreciate you giving this candid, not overly biased or bashing view. Of course, we both have seen so many organizations having adopted this, or their internalized and internally refurbished version of the same. And of course, organizational design being the first order factor that comes into play, of course. it seems to be consistent and aligned to a large extent with the way it has been compartmentalized in SAFe. And oftentimes,
but then, I mean, Gene, sorry to interrupt you. I mean, you said it earlier, scaling Agile is hard, right? I mean, doing Agile, using smaller teams or fewer teams and focusing on smaller products can be hard enough. And then scaling up and doing large scale Agile and applying Agile practices on larger products is significantly harder. It's not a linear increase in difficulties. I'd say it's more an exponential one. And so some companies, I think, just taking SAFe because, I don't know, it used to be the most readily available product, or maybe, as you said, because it sort of, there's a correlation between the org structure and the way things are done. And in SAFe, it seems to be a fairly straightforward step into the Agile world, and thought like that's going to solve our problems without taking the time to kind of learn Agile, I'd say, properly, and make sure that Agile principles and practices, tools and techniques are understood in a smaller, controllable context before you then take it, and you scale it up. So, I think sometimes it's not the frameworks and the models that are to blame, but companies just trying to rush things and not taking the time to try and understand it and, apply the models properly. Even if we say, well, no model is perfect, and, some of the frameworks certainly could be improved.
Yeah, it's actually very strongly resonates what you just said. Why just let it run a small, well-controlled experiment? And in my other language, it is also called deep and narrow, running almost like a parallel organization experiment, systemically improve, see what you learn. And then if you want to repeat it elsewhere, do so, as opposed to big bang peppering with superficial changes because it just seamlessly fits and we can claim early results. Well, if there are any results. I'm totally conscious of our time, and I want to, before I close, I would like to serve justice, and since it will be shared with my audience and wider, want to share one of your great books, which I personally find very interesting and informative. It's one of the My Con series, and was pleased to have My Con actually also speaking to me about a week ago on a similar subject. So for those of you that will be watching this, the Agile Product Management with Scrum is a very highly recommended piece to take a look.
Oh, thank you, Gene.
Yep. I would personally like to thank you, Roman, for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I'm sure you got things to do, but this was something that I personally value and appreciate. And if you would like to say just a sentence or two to close, I'll be happy to wrap this up after that.
Yeah. Well, thank you, first of all. Thank you again for having me. It's been really nice talking to you. I hope for the viewers it was a little bit helpful. And sort of a final thought on the product owner role, for those of you who work as a product owner, it can be, I sort of alluded to it earlier, it can be a rewarding and fulfilling, but also it can be quite a demanding role. And if your organization is new to product management and you don't maybe have a head of products who looks after a product management group or product management team, and you haven't really worked with product professionals, at least not for a long time, and if the organization is also new to Agile, then there's likely to be quite a bit of confusion about the product owner role. And so it's just something to be aware of, and something maybe to stick with for the time being, and kind of try and work through and show some kind of patience and perseverance, and at the same time kind of try and apply the role the way you think it is best applied for your product, and try and influence change as much as you can.
Great. Well, thank you so much. On this note, I will wrap up our conversation. It has been the privilege to have you, and it was a great session. I think hopefully our audience, our respective audiences, which would would like to combine in this case, would be very much benefited from this conversation, and will take something away they can apply and and put to use. I'm going to stop recording. Thank you very much for joining me today. And all the best to you.
Yeah, thanks, Gene. It was nice talking to you.